how to collaborate, and of course, how do we seize those business opportunities in our own respective countries and co-collaborate with one another. But ladies and gentlemen, just in interest of all the speakers coming in, may we urge you all to kindly settle down. We'll give you a minute for that. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, may we urge you all to kindly settle in. Any further networking to be done outside? All right, no disrespect to any of our speakers coming in, but we'd like to start now with our panel. So ladies and gentlemen, for the Cashew Round Table, allow me an opportunity to now invite the moderator of this conversation. He's a third generation of a cashew handling family. He joined the family broking firm more than 4 decades ago. Rather than any formal education, he learned business the easy way, which was observing his father and accompanying him for business meeting while still in his teens. I think he's being very modest around it. But ladies and gentlemen, over the year, Samson's had handled various other products, including not just spices, peanuts, sesame seeds, but also almonds and walnuts. Cashew continues to be the first love, and he's a passionate student and follower of the developments in the cashew sector. Let's continue welcoming him as the moderator with a bigger round of applause as we talk about Pankaj Sampath, Director and Owner of Samson's Trading Company. Pankaj, thank you so much for being so kind with your time and joining us today. With that, allow me an opportunity to now call upon our esteemed panelists. Starting with yet another great figure. 4th generation entrepreneur and the director of Bolas Agro Private Limited, one of India's leading dry fruits and nuts processing and retailing company. With a focus on innovation and scalability, he's somebody who's been instrumental in expanding the company's operations and modernizing its approach to meet evolving consumer needs. He began his career by spearheading the cashew kernel process automation project, collaborating with global scientists and technologists to reduce processing costs and increase efficiency. In 2019, he took charge of Bola's sales and marketing, and during the pandemic, he identified an opportunity to enhance the affordability and convenience, leading to the launch of Bola's retail stores, which offers dry fruits at factory prices. Today, Bola's operates over 75 stores across Karnataka, serving a growing customer base. Let's welcome none other than Rajat Kamath Bola. Our next panelist joining us is an award-winning nuts and dry fruits specialist. In his 30-plus years experience with multinationals and his own import business, he developed the global supply chain for natural ingredients, including his specialty, which is cashews. He has a broad range of clients, including processors, governments in Africa and Asia, and clients like the World Bank, GIZ, investment organizations, and of course the retailers. He supports small cashew processors on the pro bono basis. He's an author of more than 25 published studies and is a regular contributor to cashew publications. We're talking about none other than Mr. Jim Fitzpatrick. And joining Jim is our final panelist for this conversation. A third-generation business owner, a seasoned professional with over 35 years of extensive experience in the cashew and dry fruit industry, spanning the 3 generations of the expertise. Having joined his family business in 1990, he's been at the forefront of scaling operations and fostering growth in this dynamic sector. He joined the company which we're talking about, Cornello Foods, in 2021, processors and packers of almonds, roasted cashews, roasted in shell pistachio, and flavored nuts. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the partner at Chaman Lal Kanhaiya Lal, popularly known as JK Kaju, Alok Bhatia. So while truly having all the pivotal readers, and if we can talk about everyone having over 30 to 40 years of experience, it's fair to say that we're looking at least 150 plus years of experience in this panel. So let's give them a bigger round of applause. And it's going to be so iconic hearing them out. And with that, Pankaj, I'd like to leave it in your able hands to curate it forward.
Hi, good afternoon. I hope all of you had a good lunch, but not too much that you will get sleepy and doze off while we are speaking. Our session is going to be slightly different from the others because the others were just talking. Today we have a very strong panel which has a wealth of knowledge to share with us, so that we will be all talking standing up. And then after their presentation is over, we can have some questions and answers based on their presentation, and also any other questions that the audience has. One moment, please. Now we are going to talk about cashew, the king of dry fruits. We call it Mewa ka Raja. And I'm using the term dry fruits loosely because in India we use the name Mewa for all nuts and dried fruits. So now we are talking about Cashew, which is the king of the dry fruits, and India is the king of Cashew. Although the tree originated in Brazil, it is India who really started the commercial utilization of cashews. Almost 105 or 106 years ago. The first recorded export of cashew from India was in 1921. And in these more than 100 years, India has always been at the forefront of the cashew industry. Of course, things have been changing from year to year, and there have been a lot of changes. But at one time, I think it was 1980s, India was responsible for about 60 to 65% of the world kernel trade. I mean, India was supplying 60 to 65% of the world cashew requirements. Of course, all of it was not grown in India, but it was processed in India. In the last 100 years, there have been a lot of changes on all segments. In production, at one time, South America, Africa, and Asia were doing about 1/3 each, and then the production shifted to Asia because of problems in East Africa, the civil war in Mozambique, etc. The production came down there, so and Vietnam started increasing, so the production shifted to Asia, and then in the last 20-25 years, again Africa has taken the lead, with West Africa being very, very prominent grower now. East Africa also has been growing in the last 3, 4, 5 years. And now I would say, in the last 5 years, Asia again is making a comeback with a strong growth of production in Cambodia. So we now are probably, South America is down to maybe 5% of the world trade, of world cashew production. And Africa would be about 45-50, and Asia would be about 45-50. On the processing side, India was always in the forefront until the 1990s, and by 2000, Vietnam became the biggest processor, with India being the second. And in between, in the 1960s, 70s, Africa also was processing Mozambique and Tanzania, but that almost came down to zero almost practically. But in the last 7, 8, 10 years, West Africa has started becoming an important processor. And so now we have 3 processing areas, that is Africa, India, and Vietnam. On the consumption side, for a major portion of the 100 years, it was the Western world, the developed world as we call it, which was the main consumer. About 70-75% of the world cashew trade was destined for Europe and America. But in the last few years, Asia has become the driving force. And today I would dare to say that Asia is about 50% of the world production, world consumption, with India and China being the major players in the consumption side, followed by Middle East and North Africa. Even now, with the strong growth in Africa and Vietnam, Cambodia, India still has a very strong presence in the world cashew scenario. We are about 15% of the world cashew is grown in India. About 41% of the processing is done in India. About 34% of the consumption is in India. On the export side, we are lagging behind. We have come down to about 8% of the world kernel trade. And that is something that I'm sure the panel will be addressing in their presentation. So now, within the next 1 hour, I'm sure our panelists will share with us their knowledge on the world cashew scenario, and also what has happened in 2024, which was a very difficult year for the cashew industry, and also what to expect in 2025 and beyond. So I would now request Jim to take the stage.
Good afternoon. Let me put my timer in action so that I don't completely talk too much, which I have a habit of doing when it comes to cashews. Can I just say, first of all, how excited I am to be here and to thank the organizers for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so impressed by what we've seen so far. So thank you for that. I'm going to talk to you about the global cashew market and a perspective taking the point of view of who are, with a little bit of fun involved, who are the movers and the shakers. And we'll talk about production, demand, and I'm going to ask some questions that I think are particularly relevant for 2025. So let's start with production. And if we look at the chart, which is cashew production over about 10 years, you can see sharp growth. Biggest factor, of course, is the growth between 2020 and 2021. So world cashew production has been growing over the long term at about 5.5%, and in the last 5 years or so, that's accelerated, mainly due to the growth in Cambodia. If we look at the regions, we see the orange bars, Africa, and you can see that Africa accounts for more than half the world's production. We can see Cambodia growing. The red bars from virtually nowhere in 2015 to number 2 in the world last year. And we can see India in blue, only slow growth. Only one of the major producers is growing more slowly in production than India, and that is Vietnam. And that means that all of the consumption growth in India, which is significant, is being fed with imports. Export trade from India, as you know, has declined dramatically since about 2008. So let's have a look at the first of our big movers. And the first of our big movers is Cambodia. And what we've seen in Cambodia has never happened before in the cashew business, and in my opinion will never happen again. This huge jump in production, driven by high prices and a new variety, a revolutionary new variety, has caused production to go from around about 200,000 tons to last year 840,000 tons. The growth rate is 23% per annum over 10 years. Cambodia has become the second largest producer. For most people, this was unexpected. Interestingly, for Cambodians, It was unexpected. But this is where we stand. In Cambodia, production is generally high cost compared to other countries. Cambodian farmers spend more money on inputs, they spend more money on land, they spend more money on seedlings than anywhere else in the world. But that is compensated for by high yields. So the average yield in Cambodia is about 1.45 tons per hectare. They're planting, well, the number of trees planted varies, but it's between 1 and 200 per hectare. The production is going to continue to increase, just not at the rate of the last 10 years. And here's a forecast. So this forecast was done by us on behalf of a European Union project called CapSafe, and you can see that it shows that production based on the current trend will reach 1 million tonnes by 2030, but based on a slightly more realistic trend is likely to reach 1 million tonnes by 2028. This year, the same figures show that production will exceed 900,000 tonnes. So Cambodia is and continues to be a big mover in production. It has in fact changed the supply-demand balance. The second of our big movers, which I describe as getting bigger but not getting better, is Ivory Coast or Côte d'Ivoire. As you can see from the chart, production has grown rapidly over the last 10 years or so. This year, we think it's going to be a good crop. We think the lowest estimate, the most pessimistic estimate, is that it would match last year's 1.2 million. More realistic estimate is that it's going to approach the record production and it could hit as high as 1.4 million. When we look at where those cashews go, we can see that they are processing about 29% of their crop, 344,000 tonnes processed last year. The rest, 52% goes to Vietnam as RCN, 12% goes to India as RCN, and somewhere between 100 and 150,000 tonnes disappears across the border and miraculously changes into Ghanaian cashews, which then goes to India and Vietnam. Not getting better is the question. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, because the quality of raw cashew nuts produced, managed, and exported has declined since 2018. When the World Bank gave that famous loan to the country in 2018, the target was to bring an average quality to 50 pounds outturn. It's actually declined in that meantime. Local processors are getting about 44 pounds, and last year much lower than that. Other aspects of not getting better is that the expansion of production is by extension. More trees on more land, risk of deforestation, some would say deforestation has already happened, and an average outturn per hectare of only 460 kilos. Compare that to Cambodia. Cambodia produces 1 tonne per hectare more than Côte d'Ivoire. And finally, and topically, and influentially in 2024, is we have the continued complexities of Ivorian cashew policy. It's become unpredictable, it's become interventionalist, and in last year, during a 30-day moratorium on exports, which turned into a 60-day, which turned into a 90-day, which turned into nobody really knows what's happening anyway situation, we saw that influence on the market. So it's certainly getting bigger, and at a growth rate of 5.5%, it's going to continue to get bigger. One can only hope that it also might get better. The third of our big movers, not as big as the other two, Tanzania. Why have I included Tanzania? Well, simply because production in 2024 was up 45% on the previous year. And it looks as if this is going to continue. It does look as if Tanzania is entering a rapid growth stage. There are better trees, there are more trees, there are better policies and support, and more than anything, there's a better input system. The Achilles heel of the Tanzanian cashew sector was always the lack of the ability of the authorities to get the inputs to the farmers. They've now started to do that. If they continue to do that, we're going to see continued growth in production. And the map, I put that map in there just to show what that could mean. The dark trees in the southeast of the country are existing cashew growing areas. The lighter colour, further north and further west, are new areas. So in areas like Dodoma and Singida, there are cashew plantations now, and that could be revolutionary. Not only will it increase the number of tonnes grown, but it will also change when they're grown. In theory, Tanzania could have a cashew crop both northern and southern hemisphere. So you could see a crop from September to December, as we all know. And then you could see another crop from the northern half of the country that would start in February and go through to April. Completely changes the dynamic for the country. So let's have a look at some of the conclusions we can draw from looking at those countries and others. So going back to our chart on production estimates for 2025, I think that the minimum we can expect is the same as the 2023 crop, just under 5.3 million tonnes. But you can make a good case for production to reach close to 5.8 million tonnes, which would be a record crop. In Cambodia, crop looks good. I don't know how many videos I've got of people harvesting last week. It is a little bit late, but it looks good. In Vietnam, as we know, I think most people know, the crop is a little bit late. West Africa, in Cote d'Ivoire, there were a lot of early concerns. Those seem to have faded now, and people are telling me that they're getting good quality and they're getting good arrivals. Already we've seen a good crop in East Africa. So looking at it, my thinking for this year is that the minimum crop size is the same as 2023. There is a good chance that we will be looking at record production. But lateness means risk, and there is a possibility that that can change with the growing conditions, with the weather, and there are a lot of other factors. So don't start going short because that may not actually happen. Just because the production goes up doesn't mean that prices are going to crash. I actually don't think they are. So let's move on and have a look at demand and some of the big shakers of demand. Quickly for everyone, world demand. Consuming countries in pink. India the biggest, I reckon about 37%. Europe is now next, bigger than North America, about 18%. North America at 17%. And probably the biggest news is China at around 12% last year consumption of world cashew kernels. And that is rapid development. So India still leads, but things are changing. If we look at that consumption over a longer period, we can see that we've seen growth all the way through. Averaging out at up to 2024, 4.8%, but I'd rather step back one. Last year was a remarkable year for imports and demand. So step back 1 year and you come out at about 4.4% growth. We talked about production growth at 5.5%. Over 10 years, 6.7%. Over 5 years. Great year last year, but demand is growing more slowly than production. India is the biggest market. China is the fastest growing market. The EU deserves an honourable mention, growing at 7%, which is the fastest it has been growing for at least 20 years. So something's catching on about these cashews. And it's catching on in countries that are already consumers and catching on in countries that are new to cashews. So when we look at this, we see big drivers in all the traditional things. It's the taste, it's the texture. Sometimes we forget that. This is quite a good product to eat. But it's also things like health consciousness. It's also more modern things like snacking and convenience. So where I come from, 80% of the cashews are consumed as snacks. Completely different to India. And there are new things. There are issues coming forward that are, on the one hand, making it more challenging to supply this market, but on the other hand, making it more interesting for consumers. Consumption based on sustainability, conscience-driven consumption. And now, legally, in some areas, the European Union, for example, an obligation to source responsibly. This is changing the way we will do business in the future. Let's have a look at our first big shaker, and it's the United States, and they'd be proud to be a big shaker, wouldn't they? 23% growth in imports last year, never seen before. Hard to understand. Compare the 23% growth last year with the 10-year trend of 2.9%. Quite difficult to reconcile that. Interestingly, the growth in processed, so I mean roasted, packed, roasted and salted, growth in that segment is 13%, much faster than in natural, although it is only about 45,000 tons compared to the total import 215,000 tons. So we think that there is a little bit of an inventory buildup. The Nielsen figures for supermarkets tell us that sales were up 7.7%, the imports were up 23%. You could draw the conclusion that there's a fair bit of inventory in the hands of importers and roasters. And why wouldn't there be? Because they have experienced low prices, followed by a price rise, followed by contract default. And the only way really to hedge a default in cashews is put a few containers in the warehouse. And maybe that's what's happened. This growth in processed import is primarily driven from Vietnam. 95% of their processed cashews come from Vietnam. It's interesting also to note and to bear in mind that at the retail level, the price falls of 2022 and 2023 were not passed on. So this may well mean that what we've seen at the wholesale or international trade level actually means nothing for consumers who never benefited from the lower prices anyway. It also points to perhaps there has been a little bit of inventory building going on. And that will have a profound impact on what happens this year. For India, we need to ask the question, is this increase in the import of processed kernels to the United States, is this an opportunity for Indian exporters? Is this India's way back toward a leadership position in the world trade? And I think that's a really interesting question, which only you in the Indian business can answer. Second of the big shakers is the European Union. They may not like to be called big shakers, but that's what they are. And if you look at it, very positive growth impact in Europe. Two interruptions. 2018, and it's interesting to note, 2018 was in response to high prices in 16 and 17, but the numbers only showed up in 2018. That's price related. 2022, different story. That's economy related. So whereas we saw a delayed response to price increase, we saw a rapid response to economic downturn. This was due to the war in Ukraine. This was due to energy prices. This was due to loss of confidence in the market. Second half of 2022, imports, I won't say collapsed. Oh, I just did say collapsed, because that's what they did. Europe, 11% up on imports last year, returned to really positive growth. This is a market that still has potential. Long-term growth is about 6% per annum. We're looking at a market that talks about supply chain responsibility, is changing the way that they do business. wants to change the way that the rest of us do business, and will have a big impact as time goes on. Interestingly, although Europeans buy about 74% of their cashews from Vietnam, both India at 6% and Africa at 17%, both have larger shares than they have in the US market, which I think is a signal about the seriousness of Europeans about diversification and sustainability. Third one is China. And here what we're talking about is price impact. Chinese demand, you can see, is pretty volatile. At least the growth is pretty volatile. We can see in periods of high prices, imports fell. In periods of low prices, imports rose. And it's interesting to look at last year. If you look at the first half of last year, imports were up 63%. In the first half of last year, at least until May, prices were pretty low. 240, 250, 320s FOB. Second half of the year, compared to the previous year, imports were down by 17%. To my mind, that signals sensitivity to price in that market. It has been growing at 10% per annum, but that gets interrupted from time to time by prices or, in 2022, by the economic circumstances. If China continues, by 2030, it would be the same size as the US market. Caveats would be volatility in price, higher prices like those we have now, and the possible impact of import tariffs on other nuts. So it's unlikely that they'll put import tariffs on nuts from Vietnam, but they may well end up with tariffs on nuts from the US, for example. That could help cashew demand. If we take those numbers and we were just to take the trend of the past 10 years production and compare it to the past 10 years of consumption and forecast that to 2030, we'll end up with that chart. The green is production, the orange is consumption, and it looks like a big surplus. But it's not that realistic. So let's move away from the trends and look to a little bit more considered analysis. It still looks like a surplus. It still looks like a surplus for the next 3 years. It may cause production growth to slow down. Not many people in Cambodia were planting cashew trees when the market was low in 2022 and 2023. This takes all of that into account, but it doesn't take the weather. But to my mind, we're in a surplus situation for the immediate future. The questions. I have 5 big questions related to what's going to happen over the next 10 or 12 months. Firstly, how will prices impact demand? So this shows the growth, annual growth in percentage terms for the US and the EU since 2011. And the dotted line is the price of cashew kernels in the international market. And you can see 2016-17, prices peaked and growth slumped. But it didn't go away. Slowed down. You can see in 2012 to 2015, during relatively stable prices, we saw high rates of growth. And you can see during COVID and post-COVID, we see quite a mix. So 2022, falling imports, falling demand on economic circumstances, and then it starts to grow again, recovering that demand and also reacting to lower prices. China looks very difficult to understand, but broadly speaking, we get extremely high growth rates in China, often followed by extremely low growth rate or contraction in the size of the market over the last 15 years or so. That means in 2025, we need to watch that carefully. This may well just stop dead in its tracks, or it could go on. It could be like 2012-13, where growth accelerates. It could be like 2021-22, where the opposite happens. So my conclusions on this would be that demand will not collapse because of higher prices, that the growth rates for demand across all markets will slow down, but we will still see some growth. The forces causing people to consume more cashews are greater than the influence of the higher price level as we currently have. What it has done, I think, is it's caused the period where we can see demand catching up with supply to become a little bit longer. So I think if we were to do that forecast again today, with kernels prices around $3.40 FOB, we'd probably be saying 2029, 2030 as the earliest point, rather than 2028. Second question, will African processing succeed? Well, to a large extent, it already has. The growth rate is over 20% per annum. You can see the green bars show the processing capacity at the kernels processed in Africa over the last 10 years, rapidly growing. Problems? Well, it's still only about 17% of the crop across the continent that's processed in the country of production. And there's relatively low levels of utilization of capacity. So we have these problems. So despite fast growth, we see underutilization of capacity, and what I call the 3 M's. Doesn't apply to all, but applies to many. Management, money means working capital in this case, and marketing. Lack of management resources, lack of experience, lack of access to working capital, and really bad marketing. And this has become an issue for African processors. Third question, what is going on in African cashew policy? And I just put all those up there because I'm not going to talk about them all, but I put them up there to show every country has some form of change going on. Highlights, in Benin, the ban on RCN export continues, the support for domestic processing continues, the supply chain management is a puzzle. Production will exceed 200,000 tons, processing capacity maybe 130. How do you manage that with an export ban? In Ghana, no, in Cote d'Ivoire, my slide tells me. Okay, well, even more volatile. High farm gate price. Farm gate price in Cote d'Ivoire, average quality 46 pounds, is higher than the farm gate price in Benin. Average quality 49. Go figure that one out, because I can't. The subsidies will continue, and we cannot rule out further interventions this year. It's an election year. So we may well see some interesting interventions if the government feels they're needed. And finally, in Ghana, we can expect, probably from the next season, we can expect a new policy to support processing, and we may well see the introduction of an export tax. Those proposals have been made and are still being discussed. Fourth question, has Vietnam's marketing model changed? I think it may be changing. What was their marketing model? Well, get big, reduce quality, buy on price, sell on price, and use your muscle in the market. Pretty straightforward formula, except if everyone else has access to the technology that you have access to, number one, you end up with an 85% dependence on imported raw cashew nuts for your processing stock. African governments decide to levy taxes on your processing stock. African processors go from 75,000 tons to 344,000 tons in 5 years. And Cambodia comes along. Sure, it'll supply you raw material, but it's high quality, high price, large nuts. That doesn't fit with low price, low quality models. So you need to change. What's happened, in my view, is that Vietnam's competitive advantage has been undermined. It's been undermined by high supply chain costs and rising raw material costs, regardless of the market: freight, fuel, taxation. And now these factors, so competition based on quality and sustainability from African countries in particular, erodes the competitive advantage, which was based on price. But they're doing something about it. I told you that the growth of imports of processed cashews into the United States was 13% per annum. And we said it was 95% sourced from Vietnam. I think that's the future. So they're adding more value. They're focusing on different markets for supply. Present in Tanzania more than ever this year. Higher quality material. Obviously present in Cambodia. Cambodia may not be what Vietnam expected. They expected 1 million tons, but they didn't expect to be paying $1,200 at the farm gate. They didn't expect it to be counting 160, 180. That changes the marketing model. So I think Vietnamese marketing model is changing, and I think it will continue to change. And the final question, are we aligned with the drivers of consumer demand? The we is the international market. And if we look at these factors, if we consider the main things that buyers in markets in the Middle East or in Europe or in the United States or in China, what do they want? They want a quality product, of course they do. They want a resilient supply chain. They want a short supply chain. They want safe food. Part of that is transparency and traceability. They love price stability. We saw earlier, when you see stable prices, you see growth in demand. When you see volatility, you see slump in the growth rates. And increasingly, buyers want compliance to human rights, compliance in labor and environmental considerations. And what's interesting about that is the request for those things is nothing new. But the fact that in markets like Europe, it's now becoming the law, that's the game changer. Are we aligned with the drivers of consumer demand? No, probably not. Is the product aligned? Absolutely. Healthy, convenient, great taste. So to conclude, the trends for the year ahead as I see them. A good to very good crop, slowing demand growth, but no return to the very low prices of 2022 and 2023. There is enough demand, there are enough factors, inventories are low enough going into the year in the processing countries to keep prices maybe around the current levels, maybe a little bit lower, but there's no crash as far as I can see. The triggers, things to watch out for that might change this or might confirm it. The situation in Côte d'Ivoire, wet harvest, we need to keep an eye on what's happening there with the weather as the harvest comes in. In Cambodia, how is that crop progressing? Is it catching up? Watch the farm gate prices to understand how the crop is going. Are US buyers in the market? When they come to the market and how they come to the market will tell us whether or not they're carrying inventories of cashews in the US market, or alternatively, whether US demand really did go up by 23% in 2024. Similarly with China, how will China react to prices? We have seen that China historically has reacted more to price changes than any other market. Will 2025 be the same? Longer term, is Vietnam changing to a less aggressive approach? So will Vietnamese processors stop simply marketing on price and start marketing on other factors? This is important because in 2022, we saw virtual panic in Vietnam that crashed prices. When we expected them to lift from $2.60 to $2.80, maybe $3 a pound, they actually crashed to $2.40 for no good reason other than people panicked. And finally, and most unpredictably, we have to consider the actions of African governments managing this season. And I refer there specifically to the management of the raw cashew nut export. So there's a little bit of food for thought, a few trends, a few numbers, a few questions. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for a very, very comprehensive presentation. I'm sure the audience will have a lot of questions on this, arising out of this, so maybe the session will have to be extended. I will now call upon Alok ji to talk about the Indian market, what the buyers feel about the cashew consumption trends, etc. So, Alok ji, please.
सबसे पहले तो सबको मेरा नमस्कार। जितने यहाँ बैठे हैं सभी मेरे दोस्त, मेरे मित्र। अभी मैं ऊपर स्टेज पे आ रहा था तो हमारे मार्गदर्शक, मैं कहूँ मेंटोर हमारे, उन्होंने कहा कि अलू स्टेज पे जा रहा है, कुछ अच्छा ही यहाँ पर बताना, सबके अच्छा ही हो। तो सबसे पहले मैं उनको देख रहा हूँ जो मेरे मेंटोर हैं, मेरे मित्र हैं, मेरे मार्गदर्शक हैं, जो अभी नीचे बैठे हैं और मैं स्टेज पर यहाँ बैठे हूँ। तो उनके लिए मैं दो लाइनें कहना चाहूँगा कि किस कविता का पाठ करूँ, किस नज़्म को पेश करूँ, किस कविता का पाठ करूँ, किस नज़्म को पेश करूँ। चांद सितारे बैठे हैं, मैं दिया यहाँ क्या नाम करूँ। सबसे पहले तो मैं एनडीएफसी की ऑर्गेनाइजिंग कमेटी को बहुत बहुत शुभकामनाएं, बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं इस मेवा 25 के सफल आयोजन पर। बहुत मेहनत की है इन्होंने और मेरे जैसे छोटे से एक शख्स को इन्होंने यहाँ पर स्टेज पे जगह दी है। तो मैं पूरी एनडीएफसी टीम का, पूरे ऑर्गेनाइजिंग कमेटी का धन्यवाद करता हूँ। मेरे सामने राजू भाटिया जी नज़र आ रहे हैं, मानव जी नज़र आ रहे हैं, राहुल कामत भी नज़र आ रहे हैं और पूरे जितने भी एनडीएफसी के हैं मेंबर्स, उनका मेरा बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद कि आपने मुझे ये चांस दिया। रही बात, सबका एक प्रयास है। अभी मिस्टर जिम ने जो रखी फिगर्स रखी, जो डाटा दिया, उससे ये पता ज़रूर लग रहा है मेरे को कि हम इंडियंस के लिए, हमारे मैन्युफैक्चरर्स के लिए भी ये प्रॉब्लम्स बढ़ रही है। जो रॉ नट उन्होंने लेना है उसके लिए उनको बहुत दिक्कतें बढ़ती जा रही हैं, क्योंकि कंपटीशन बहुत ही ज़्यादा वर्ल्ड वाइड बढ़ रहा है। तो हम सब ने मिलके मेहनत करनी है। आपने प्रोडक्शन में मेहनत करनी है, प्रोडक्शन बढ़ाना है, हमने सेल्स बढ़ानी है, हम ट्रेडर्स ने सभी लगे पड़े हैं। यहाँ दिल्ली से मेरे भाई आए हुए हैं, सौरभ, गौरव, मेरे को जयपुर से प्रदीप जी, इंदर, विनय, बड़ौदा से, मतलब सभी यहाँ पर आए हुए हैं पूरे इंडिया से। तो मैं उन सब का धन्यवाद करता हूँ कि वो यहाँ पर आए और उनकी तरफ से मैं आज बात रखना चाहता हूँ जो उन्होंने मुझे फ़ोन करके बताई हैं कि कैसे हम मिलकर इस ट्रेड को अच्छा बना सकें, इस ट्रेड में प्रोडक्शन ज़्यादा हो सके, सेल ज़्यादा हो सके। जो कुछ कमियाँ मैन्युफैक्चर साइड से हैं या मैं कहूँगा कि हमारे सेल करने में हमें जो प्रॉब्लम आती है, तो एनडीएफसी ने हमें ये मंच दिया है आज, बहुत ही अच्छा प्रयास है कि हम सब मिलकर इन प्रॉब्लम्स को दूर करें ताकि हमारा इंडिया, जो पहले भी कैश्यू इंडस्ट्री के अंदर नंबर 1 था और आगे भी नंबर 1 रहेगा। तो सबसे पहले मैं एक प्रॉब्लम आपको बताना चाहता हूँ कि क्या हम ट्रेडर्स को ऑल ओवर इंडिया में क्या प्रॉब्लम आती है। B2B बिजनेस था, सदियों से चलता आ रहा था, एक ट्रेडिशन बना हुआ था कि हाँ भी पहले मैन्युफैक्चरर्स के बाद ट्रेडर्स, ट्रेडर्स के बाद रिटेलर्स और रिटेलर्स के बाद कंज्यूमर्स। बहुत अच्छा चल रहा था, हमेशा सबका बिजनेस ग्रो कर रहा था। ईयरली हम सब सेल्स बढ़ा रहे थे, मैन्युफैक्चरर्स की सेल भी बढ़ रही थी, ट्रेडर्स की भी सेल बढ़ रही थी, सबकी, सभी खुश थे। पर नया ज़माना आ गया, सब कुछ कंप्यूटर, इंटरनेट, साइट्स, सब कुछ आने के बाद एक शुरू हुआ B2C, डायरेक्ट टू कंज्यूमर। हमें भी उसमें प्रॉब्लम नहीं थी कि हाँ भी कंज्यूमर को दो, हम ट्रेडर्स हैं, ठीक है, कंपटीशन होता है अगर डायरेक्ट कंज्यूमर के पास जाएगा, लेकिन उसमें प्रॉब्लम नहीं है कि अगर हमारे कंज्यूमर को एक अच्छा सही रेट पर अगर काजू मिल सके तो उससे अच्छी चीज़ नहीं हो सकती, तो हमें उसमें प्रॉब्लम नहीं था। तो ये ट्रेडर्स की हम सब की ये आवाज़ है कि B2B छोड़ के अब ये जो बिजनेस B2R शुरू हो गया है। B2R का मतलब बिजनेस टू रिटेलर, मतलब मैन्युफैक्चरर्स टू रिटेलर। आज कोई भी मैंगलोर चला जाए, कोई भी कोलम चला जाए, या कोई भी उड़ीसा, आंध्रा, कहीं भी जाए, रिटेलर्स को 2 केसेस, 4 केसेस, 40 केजीज, 100 केजीज, 200 केजीज, ठीक है, मार्जिन अच्छा मिलता है, बट इस चीज़ ने हमारे ट्रेड को डिस्टर्ब किया है। जो एक चेन बनी हुई थी जिसमें सभी अच्छा कर रहे थे, सभी कमा के इस बिज़नेस को ऊपर लेके आ रहे थे, उस बिज़नेस में कहीं ना कहीं प्रॉब्लम आने लग गई। जब वो प्रॉब्लम आई, ट्रेडर्स भी पीछे होने लगे। आप ही लोगों के मैन्युफैक्चरर्स के ब्रांड सबने एस्टेब्लिश किए इतने सालों के अंदर, वो अपना ब्रांड बनाने की सोचने लगे, तो कहीं ना कहीं एक प्रॉब्लम शुरू हो गई। तो मेरी मैन्युफैक्चरर से ये रिक्वेस्ट है कि हाँ भाई, आप B2C करिए, कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, लेकिन B2R मत करिए, रिटेलर्स को नहीं करिए। इस बारे में मैं सोच रहा। मेरी सेकंड जो है, जो सबसे डिस्कस हुआ मेरा, कि डे बाय डे पैकेजिंग हमारी डाउन होती जा रही है। जैसे मैंने लास्ट एक बारी हमारी हुई थी, तो उसमें मैंने ये बात रखी थी कि पहले 1 kg के टिन्स, उसके बाद 800 ग्राम्स के टिन्स, 700 ग्राम्स, 650, मतलब रिड्यूस जो टिन की क्वालिटी है वो रिड्यूस करते जा रहे हैं। कुछ छोटे से लालच के लिए उसके अंदर जो गैसेस भरी जाती हैं, कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड जो भी टिन्स में रखी जाती है, पैकेट्स में डाली जाती हैं, नाइट्रोजन फ्लशिंग की जाती है, वो की ही नहीं जाती। तो जब तक मैन्युफैक्चरर से हम ट्रेडर्स के पास माल आता है और हमारे बाद जब रिटेलर्स पे जाता है, फिर कंज्यूमर पे जाता है, तब तक उसकी शेल्फ लाइफ सही नहीं है, वो ख़राब हो जाता है और फिर हमें प्रॉब्लम आती है। ये भी बहुत बड़ा रीज़न है कि कैशू में अगर सेल्स बढ़ानी है तो उसकी हमें शेल्फ लाइफ बढ़ाने के लिए करना पड़ेगा। टिन्स के अंदर किसी भी फैक्ट्री में, सभी फैक्ट्रीज या सभी कहते हैं पाँचों इंगलियाँ एक बराबर नहीं हैं, 10 kgs की जगह 9960 कैशू डालना, 40 ग्राम्स का, 30 ग्राम्स का। ये क्या चीज़ है? मतलब ये छोटा सा लालच 10 kgs पूरा उसको फिल करने की जगह 40 ग्राम्स कम करना, ये क्या सही है? जब वो माल हमारे रिटेलर्स पे जाता है, वो डिफरेंसेस लेके आता है, हमारा विश्वास भी ख़त्म होता है और हमारा फैक्ट्री के प्रति हमारा विश्वास ख़त्म होता है। तो मेरा ये सबसे रिक्वेस्ट है कि प्लीज़ इस चीज़ को आप देखिए कि हाँ भाई, ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए, और जो पैकेजिंग है वो बेस्ट अगर हम देंगे तो मेरे ख्याल से काजू की सेल्स बढ़ाने में हमें कोई ट्रेडर्स को प्रॉब्लम नहीं आएगी। उसके बाद है आजकल पेमेंट रिस्क। पेमेंट रिस्क का मतलब है मेरा, एडवांसेस जाते हैं, हमें कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, एडवांसेस लीजिए, कोई दिक्कत नहीं है। लेकिन जब प्रोडक्ट आता है, जैसे कि फ्लक्चुएटिंग मार्केट है, रेट्स ऊपर हो गए, जब तक ट्रेडर्स पे वो माल आता है वो अप टू द मार्क नहीं होता, क्वालिटी डाउन होती है। क्या रेट्स की वजह से ये किया? मतलब हम ट्रेडर्स को किन मुश्किलों से निकलना पड़ता है कि हाँ भाई, एक तरफ तो हम पैसे एडवांस भेज रहे हैं, उसके बाद जब रेट बढ़ गए तो क्वालिटी डाउन आ रही है। ऐसा हमारे कैशू ट्रेड में नहीं होना चाहिए, पहले नहीं होता था। तब कैशू की सेल भी बहुत अच्छे बढ़ रही थी। अब हमें बहुत डिफ़िकल्टी होती है बेचने के अंदर कि हाँ भी वो माल अगर हल्का आ गया, ठीक है, हल्का भेजना, हल्के का रेट लीजिए ना। तो इस चीज़ के ऊपर भी हमें सोचना है। और एक जो सबसे भारी प्रॉब्लम हम लोगों के आगे आ रही है वो है ग्रेडिंग की। पहले एक चार्ट होता था, W180, प्लेन 180, W210, प्लेन 210, एक चार्ट के अंदर सब कुछ आ जाता था, SWP सब आ जाता था। आजकल कोई है ही नहीं है, स्टैंडर्डाइज ही नहीं कर रखा उसको। किसी फैक्ट्री का W320 कुछ और है, किसी फैक्ट्री का वो WW320 है। कोई स्टैंडर्ड ही नहीं, मतलब एक जो स्टैंडर्डाइज इसको हमें सबको करना पड़ेगा। आज इतने ग्रेड्स हो गए हैं कि अगर हम एक टिन भी, आप जानते हैं हमारी खारी बावली की मार्केट, मैं अपनी मार्केट की बात कर रहा हूँ, छोटी सी मार्केट है, एक फैक्ट्री के अगर खोलने बैठे तो 100 टिन सैंपल के खुल जाते हैं, दुकानें छोटी, गोडाउन छोटे, तो ये कितनी भारी प्रॉब्लम है। उसको एक स्टैंडर्ड बनाना चाहिए कि हाँ भी W320 रखिए, लेकिन सब फैक्ट्रीज का वो स्टैंडर्ड मेंटेन रहना चाहिए। ग्रेड्स जितने कम करेंगे उतना हमको बेनिफिट है ट्रेडर्स को बेचने के लिए। मेरे मेंटोर, मेरे प्रकाश कलबावी जी, मेरे तुकाराम जी यहाँ बैठे हैं, मेरी उनसे ये डिस्कशन होती है कि हाँ भी जितना ज़्यादा हम ये ग्रेडिंग करते हैं उतना हम लोगों के लिए डिफ़िकल्ट होता है। तो ये चीज़ के ऊपर भी हमें सोचना है कि जितने ग्रेड्स कम करेंगे एक स्टैंडर्ड बना दीजिए, चाहे ओरिजिन कोई भी आए। अब बेनिन आता है तो उसका ओरिजिन अलग है, तो उसका W320 अलग है और SSW अलग है। अब तंजानिया आ गया तो उसका अलग है, दूसरे का अलग है, ये प्रॉब्लम आ गया। तो हम ट्रेडर्स के लिए बहुत ही दिक्कत वाला काम है। तो इस चीज़ के बारे में भी हमें सोचना चाहिए। समय कम है, मैं ज़्यादा टाइम ना लूँ, अगर मैं लेने बैठा टाइम तो बहुत ज़्यादा लग जाएगा, शिकायतें चलती रहेंगी, बैठेंगे। और बहुत अच्छा राजू भाटिया जी, राहुल जी, मानव जी और इनकी पूरी टीम, इन्होंने ये हमें इतना अच्छा चांस दिया है कि एक मंच पे आके हम ऑल ओवर इंडिया, नहीं ऑल ओवर वर्ल्ड कहूँगा, हम ट्रेडर्स हों, मैन्युफैक्चरर्स हों, हम आते हैं, हम यहाँ पर डिस्कस करते हैं और उसके बाद में भी डिस्कस करेंगे और ये इसका कुछ सॉल्यूशन मिलकर हम सब ज़रूर निकालेंगे। ये मेरा आपसे वादा है। मैं जो कहता हूँ सच कहता हूँ, सच के अलावा कुछ नहीं कहता हूँ। थैंक यू।
धन्यवाद आलोक जी, thank you very much. And now I will give it to Rajat to talk about what is happening in the Indian industry and the Indian market as well.
Hi, very good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be, an absolute honor to be a part of this esteemed panel. So I'll be wearing two hats today. So I'll be talking about the cashew processing perspective as well as cashew as a consumer brand, and dry fruits as a consumer brand. So it will be about the opportunities, challenges, and the outlook of the industry. So a question that I've been hearing about in the session here is about overcapacity in India, whether there is overcapacity in India. Is this a myth or is this a reality? Let us understand this by numbers. The Indian crop has largely stagnated over the last decade. It is about 6 to 7 lakh tons. The world crop in comparison has grown from 35 lakh tons in 2018 to 55 lakh tons in 2024. The world crop is growing, the Indian crop is stagnant. However, India's raw cashew nut imports are on a steady rise in line with the global growth in production. This clearly indicates that there is no overproduction or overcapacity. So why is there a perception of overcapacity in India? I feel that this perception is because of the introduction of efficient processing and the lack of efficient processing in India, which has resulted in a lot of units getting closed. So the issue is not that of overcapacity, but it's the issue of the survival of fittest. This has been a major topic of discussion in the cashew industry. How processing has changed over a period of time. The first photo is that of 2005 when we first started, and the second photo is that of the processing today. So what has happened overall is that because of introduction of efficient processing, all over the world, the cashew kernel has become more or less, the grades in cashew kernel has become more or less different from what it was before. As Alok ji was saying, कि क्यों इतना changes है grades में ये है, because there is a shift in the way India is processing cashew kernels, right? And the issue is that not all the 100% of India's cashew processors are at the same stage or same level of efficiency. Secondly, what has happened in post-mechanization is that the need for labor and skilled labor has reduced because the focus has gone to the machines and standardization. And this has resulted in decentralization of hubs. Less need for skilled labor, the efficient grading and processing happening through the machines. We have a lot of very good exhibitors here from the machinery side of cashew processing. And there is hence a growing processor base all over India. This has resulted in decentralization. Also, there has been shift in consumer patterns. What has happened is that we have seen a rise of organized retail. This rise has resulted in a clear difference in how we are marketing cashew kernel. Previously, we used to look at what matters to a certain set of buyers. So our first contact point was either our customers, our export customers, or the trader. But currently what has happened is the first contact point has become the end consumer. So when we go D2C, we are trying to understand what the end consumer wants and what the end consumer enjoys in cashew nuts. And that may be a little different from what our earlier customers used to believe. And this has actually added to increasing efficiency in processing because the end consumer today doesn't really care about the shape of the nut or the texture of the nut. What matters to them is basically the taste and the crunchiness. There has been a steady rise in healthy snacking space, and what this has done is it has increased cashew as an ingredient product, and also what this has done is it has tried to remove the highs and lows of the seasonality by introducing a lifestyle for the products. There is a rise in the branded packaged category of dry fruits. You can see this is a shelf of organized retail, and there are 3 brands there. So if there are 3 brands in an organized retail shelf, it means that there is a demand from the consumer for branded packaged commodity. And the grades are getting aligned to the end consumer requirement. So can India regain its export market? Why has India lost out on this export market is again purely due to inefficiencies or not being as efficient as Vietnam or any other competitors. But also another reason is that India consumes a very different type of nut than the world consumes. India's consumption patterns are very different. As Jim was saying, the world where he comes from, 80 or 85% of the product goes into snacking, whereas in India, most of our, at least 40% of our product by volume is consumed as ingredients. So India requires a different kind of product. Is it not possible for India to regain the export market? Definitely it is. But currently our focus is on the Indian market because we are still trying to make the Indian process more and more efficient. And once that process is complete, we can definitely look at creating different units that can process cashew nuts as efficiently as other places with a different quality of nut as an input. And a very interesting point by Jim about the increase in the processed cashew exports to the United States. I think that's something that can also be explored by the industry. So now I'm going to wear my second hat, which is the domestic market. What has happened? What are the trends in modern retail? So I strongly believe that 2020s is the moment now is that of dry fruits as a consumer brand. The dry fruits industry is definitely witnessing an Ashirwad Atta moment. And cashew is leading the charge. So modern retail mein kya ho raha hai? One very, very clear indication in modern retail is that trail mixes are growing, fast growing and taking larger and larger market share. पहले हम क्या सोचते थे कि when we are talking about value added products, we were only looking at a dry roasted and salted segment or a flavored segment in cashew nuts. which is taking its own time as it's not really a cultural factor or anything that to drive that segment. But today what we are seeing is that trail mixes is taking that space, especially in organized retail. Secondly, we are seeing that whatever said and done, India is still consuming, 80% of India is not really consuming cashew nuts on a daily basis. So we are seeing a lot of brands now focusing on trial packs at a more affordable price point, like a $49.99, $150, $149, and so on. And this is resulting in more and more affordability and trials. Finally, we are seeing, especially in modern retail and in general trade, an introduction of long shelf life Kaju Katli. Now this is actually creating additional demand because जब हम किसी एक सुपरमार्केट में पहले जाते थे तो वहाँ पे we used to find son papdis or the gulab jamuns or the rasgullas, but we would never find a Kaju Katli in a supermarket store. But now with the introduction of map technology and new brands coming into that space, we are seeing good growth. Lastly, in the value-added roasted snacks segment, cashew still occupies around 40 to 50% of the market share, and it's just bound to grow. Finally, what is happening with the traditional FMCG distribution channel and what are the challenges there? I feel what modern retail, especially quick commerce and e-commerce have done is they've added convenience and value both together, which is causing a direct clash with the traditional FMCG distribution. And traditional FMCG distribution has always been successful when the ticket size is less than 50 or 100 rupees, wherein the margins would be in single digits. Whereas when one has to think about margins in dry fruits products, it would go in high double digits, and that is really causing the difference in value that the customer is getting in modern retail versus in traditional FMCG distribution. And finally, what we are seeing is, initially it was very difficult to market a premium product to Indian customer because Indian niche customer, 1% of India's earning potential customers were spread out all over India, and any one distribution would not be enough to cater to them. But what quick commerce has done is that it has hit the nail on the coffin, wherein the whole of India's top 1% is using that channel, and hence premiumization is becoming possible and more efficient for the brands. Finally, I think this is a very important slide, and this is something that has happened over the last 2 or 3 years, wherein new age media has replaced largely traditional media. And what this has done is that user generated content is now myth busting regarding health benefits or certain myths about cashew nuts. So previously fat was a taboo word, right? 5 years ago when we were creating some content and we had good fat written on cashews, then my team told me just remove that, it's going to create a bad impact. But today, because of new age media coming in, words like cholesterol, fat, protein, diabetes, all of the myths are being busted by numerous user-generated content creators, and this is creating positive affirmation about cashew as a product and hence leading to the consumption increase. Finally, I think any panel in cashew is not complete without ingredient. So as new products coming in the healthy snacking space, we are seeing that more than 20 or 30% of the core ingredients in the healthy snacking space are dry fruits and nuts, and majorly cashew because of their taste profiles. Hence, we are seeing that with increase of this space, and with the space growing, there would be a cut down on the seasonality aspect of cashew kernel consumption. And finally, there is growing income all over India, and we are looking at really positive years going ahead, looking forward to 2020 and 2030 now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajat. Very exciting presentation. बंद कर दो वो slide पीछे कर देना. Thank you. Now we are running out of time, so I have a couple of questions for the panelists, but I will not ask them. I will request the audience if any questions. We will take them up first. Any questions?
So, since we are really short of time, we'll just like to entertain 2 questions, starting with the gentleman out here. So, if you can just, in interest of time, keep it concise, as we're overboard by 20 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very informative. My question is to Jim. Jim, you were mentioning about Tanzanian crop and also about the northern crop and 2 crops a year. So is this substantiated with some satellite data or some ground truthing, or is it something that's still in the works?
No, this is happening. They haven't done satellite research on it, but it is evident from a number of cooperatives and processing projects that are being developed around expanded production area. So the trees are actually there. In many cases, they're just not producing as yet.
Thank you. One final question. If anyone has, please raise your hand. To the gentleman out there. Sir, can you just keep it up so that they can identify you? Just request you for a concise question.
Just a crisp one. We have a almond board, we have a pistachio board. Is there a cashew board in pipeline? And I believe this has to be done by the Indian processors and manufacturers. So I think that will help. Thank you.
So the cashew space in India is such that it definitely is required, given the current state of the cashew processing in India, and the changing scenarios of world cashew processing. India will have to take the initiative, and with the ICA, All India Cashew Manufacturing Association, we have laid the first foundation of creating a cashew board to market cashew in India, as well as all over the world. But I think it's a work in progress. We are looking at creating a consensus among Indian processors to try and market cashew in India, but it's a work in progress. I hope we can give you some good news by the next NDFC session.
Thank you so much. Pankaj, if with your kind permission, is that okay to wrap up?
Just before we end,
Just the mic, yes.
before we end, as an eternal optimist who believes that tomorrow will be better than today, I will take from Ashok's comment yesterday about dry fruit consumption in India. This is a fun fact about cashew that I would like to share with you. With the current production of 5 million tons, which is about 1.1 million tons of kernels, if only 5% of the world population eats only half an ounce of cashews every day, the cashews will be over in 176 days. So there is scope to increase, to double the cashew production. So my aspiration or my dream would be that we double the cashew production, we grow more, we process more, don't worry about selling, cashews will sell themselves. With that, I would like to end the note.
Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, on that note, if I may request all our panelists to please step forward, allow us an opportunity to capture all of you in one frame. But for the time being, if I could request the Honorary President of NDFCI, Mr. Raju Bhatia, to please help us with the felicitation. Let's give Mr. Bhatia a warmer round of applause as we welcome him on the stage. And of course, for his valuable time in terms of felicitating all our key panelists. May we first request Mr. Bhatia to please pitch in for the photograph. Let's get them all in one frame. Ladies and gentlemen, a big, big round of applause. What an endearing discussion this turned out to be. Quite a comprehensive one wherein they overlooked a lot of aspects, and I'm sure this was all in interest of all our delegates present here and we hope you garnered the knowledge from the same. With that, can we get the token of appreciation being now sent to the stage? First up, if we could have Mr. Pankaj Sampath and Raju Bhatia in one frame. Well, it's always said breaking of glass is a big, good omen for the team. So let's continue with that. It's absolutely fine. Just a step a little ahead. I don't want anyone to get hurt. So, yeah, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, a big, big round of applause. Mr. Raju Bhatia and Mr. Pankaj Sampath. If I may now request Rajat Kamath Bola to please now step forward, and Mr. Raju Bhatia to help us with the felicitation. A warmer round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed the conversation. It's all happening at Mewa India 2025. May we now request Jim to kindly step forward. Jim Fitzpatrick. Thank you so much for your valuable time. And Raju Bhatia to do us the honors. Let's give him a warmer round of applause. And if you could now get Alok Bhatia in frame with Raju Bhatia. Of course, there's still one photograph needed. Let's get that in play. Can we now request Mr. Alok Bhatia to please step forward? Just be careful of the glass. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let the applause continue. I think the energy in the room has to double with the kind of information you've got today at the platform. And since it's the second edition of Mewa India 2025, of course, always double the applause is required. With that, thank you so much, and thank you for joining us, gentlemen.
I just want to say a couple of words for Alok and the panelists. Jim did a fantastic presentation, and Alok changes the evolution of life. So we need to change, we need to have forward integration, don't be discouraged. For the composition of the trade distribution, 80% is still the traditional trade. 15% is the modern trade, 5% is the e-commerce and Q-commerce. There's enough demand over here to cater to everybody. So don't be discouraged. There's place for everybody. There's enough growth in this market. There's enough population over here. So cheers to everybody. And I hope you guys do well in your trade and businesses.
Thank you so much. And with that, may we request our panelists to please proceed towards the audience. The group photograph is already done. We can request them to please be seated. And ladies and gentlemen, yes, as per schedule, our next session, Raisins, Figs and Apricot Roundtable. Allow me an opportunity. We've got some key speakers joining us. Mrityunjay Kumar Jha, who's going to be the moderator from Z Business, who's joining us. There's Osman Ozed, who's going to be from the Turkish Dried Fruit Sectoral Board. We have Mukul Khurana, who's from Kalumal Motiram. We've got Ashok Bafna from ABC Raisins India, Sangli, and Dharmesh Thakkar from Trent Hypermarket Private Limited. So may we urge all of you to kindly settle down as we'd allow an opportunity to now for the Raisins, Figs and Apricot Roundtable to be commencing, and for that we would urge you to be seated. So well, ladies and gentlemen, with that, allow me an opportunity to now invite our moderator. He's a commodity editor of Z Business, who's been associated with Z Business for the last 17 plus years. Prior to